Hello, everyone, and welcome to the middle of our ACRL Framework and AI webinar series brought to you by the UDC Library. My name is Megan Kowalski, and I'll be presenting today's session on AI plus the value of information. This is about the third or the fourth in this series, looking at the ACRL framework as it relates to our new AI information environment. And if you missed any of the previous sessions, they are all recorded and are posted to our YouTube. This event is being recorded, and a recording link will be sent to all registrants once the event is over and posted to our YouTube later this afternoon. If you have any questions during this event, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat, and I will answer them as we go. So welcome to today's session. And like I said, this is being recorded, and please stop on by the library if you have any questions. Today, we're essentially going to look at the overview of the information has value frame. Value as, what does it mean in the age of AI? We're going to look at authorship, ownership, and intellectual property, data as privacy and commodification, equity and algorithmic bias, information privilege, and we're going to wrap up with some practical strategies of how to use what you learned today in the classroom and with your students. So I'm not going to read the entirety of the frame. It's on the screen, or just go to the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy in Higher Education, and you can read the entire document for yourself. We're going to do a quick overview. So information holds multiple types of value, and it goes beyond money. And, value can come from all kinds of areas, and our legal and social systems shape who can access, create, and benefit from information. And the key concepts in this frame are that information can be bought, sold, restricted, or used to influence. And this also involves issues like copyright, fair use, open access, and data privacy. And all of that affects how information circulates. And this frame also talks about how some groups are marginalized by the existing information systems. And in an AI world, that impact is compounded. Each of the frames in the document also have a set of knowledge practices and dispositions that essentially say learners should be able to, at least in this case of this frame, cite and give credit properly, understand intellectual property basics, recognize access barriers and information privilege, and make informed choices about privacy and sharing personal data. And a disposition of someone who understands the value of information is that they respect the ideas of others, value the labor behind information, but also see themselves as contributors and not just consumers of information. And so, what does information have value mean when we add AI to it? Well, like I said earlier, value is more than just dollars and cents. It goes beyond money. Information carries value in terms of legal features, social aspects, economic aspects, and ethical dimensions. AI intensifies these things by reshaping how information is created, distributed, and accessed. AI also, kind of makes things confusing when it comes to rights and responsibilities and the inequities built into information systems. These all existed before AI, but they are further complicated by adding AI into the mix. So this frame asks us to consider who benefits from information, who pays for that information, plus who is represented or erased. AI makes these questions entirely unavoidable. And so first, we have to understand, what does it mean by understanding the value of information? AI models depend on vast data sets. So the information we produce, in our daily lives becomes raw material for these data training sets. This includes things like personal data, creative works, search histories, and conversations. AI shifts notions of what we mean by credibility. So if you value credible information, AI has upended what that means. It's changed what we think of as accurate and authoritative. AI can sound confident even when, and maybe particularly when, it is wrong. AI does not say, I don't know. And so the idea of what is authoritative and credible and accurate changes when you have a system declaring something to be true when it clearly is not. And machine generated content blurs the line between product and process. What does it mean create when you are using AI? This destabilizes the idea of ownership. So, who holds the right to machine generated outputs? Who has that copyright? And the Supreme Court recently declined to hear a case on this as it relates to AI art. So, even the law is still a little bit fuzzy on these issues. AI generated content and everything that goes into it is ambiguous in terms of value when it comes to authority, accuracy, and ownership, simply because this is so new. We don't know how to handle it in our court system. And the monetization models behind AI change things as well. AI platforms profit from user activity and data. And who should profit from the information created by AI? Is it the original creator's works who trained the model? Is it the person who designed the prompt? Is it the person who then took that output and sold it? Or is it the AI company itself? We honestly don't know the answers to these questions. And this ties into the ACRL frame because the value of information includes who benefits, who pays, and who is represented in those areas. And we must see information as a part of a larger economic and social system. Information does not exist in a vacuum. It is wrapped up in everything else we have going on. And so, who owns AI generated content? There are copyright challenges working their way through the court system. The training data that designed these AI systems often, and in fact, almost always, includes copyrighted material that was simply scraped or taken. It was not paid for. So the original creators of the material that made these AI data sets that they were trained on were never reimbursed or never given any sort of money for that material they originally created. And the outputs of AI may lack originality to stand as their own, thing or clear ownership. So AI can also provide free access to stuff that was existing in copyright while also making new things. And we don't know how to differentiate between the two. And the idea of fair use, which is the law that allows you to take existing works and not pay for them for the purposes of, say, parody or education or creating new works, is complicated by AI because what is fair when the models were built on stolen data? And even AI companies admit that paying to license the material they trained their AI programs on would have been far too expensive. I mean, just ask librarians. We know how expensive it is to license content, or simply look in your own life. You have to budget for how many streaming services you have at one time because paying for all of that information gets very expensive quickly. And what does this mean for, the implications for student work and faculty research? How do we cite AI? Is it the prompt? Is it the output? Is it the original creator? It's fuzzy. And also, what counts as our own work? These are and will continue to be legal questions. And this ties into the ACRL frame because it reinforces the responsibility in giving credit. It also encourages the understanding of intellectual property as socially and culturally constructed because the idea of who owns that IP is a little fuzzy right now. It also highlights the power dynamics in whose work is used or reused without credit. These AI companies are so big and have so much money behind them that most of society has just kind of said, well, they stole all of it, but what are you going to do? They're too big to fail. Meanwhile, the original creators who did all the work in the first place to create that material are being overlooked and marginalized because, well, they're too small to fight these companies and their legal teams. And so this then leads us into the idea of data ethics, privacy, and commodifications. There are things that, the fuzzy they don't want you to know. who reads the end user agreements we all have to click through to get to these tools? And user interactions continue to feed these AI models through their prompts and their clicks and their behaviors. All of this is continuing to train these AI tools. And the risk of this is basic surveillance and also the loss of control and the inference of sensitive information. Claude AI was recently declared a national supply chain risk because they wouldn't change their agreement with the Pentagon about setting restrictions on surveilling Americans. So these tools can be used to do that. And some companies are saying, no, we're setting a guardrail here, while others are not. And more often than not, the end user, the people using these tools, don't know the difference. And there's this free tool trade-off. When a platform is free, you, the user, are the product. And so this connects to the issues of equity. Some communities are more vulnerable to data exploitation, simply through misunderstanding, or, when you're trying to read the legalese of those end user agreements, it's complicated. It's in some ways designed to confuse you. And so this ties into the ACRL framework because it says that we need to recognize how personal information becomes commodified. Every time we're on our phone, every time we're using an AI tool, tracking tools, whatever it is, that information, unless you explicitly go in and say, don't do it, is then used by these companies. And so, an AI literate user in this field will understand that they need to make informed choices about their privacy and online actions. And we also need to understand the limits and risks that come with these digital environments. And AI can reinforce or amplify these structural inequities when it comes to information ethics and algorithm bias. AI is trained on existing data, and it's a garbage in, garbage out sort of situation. When the training data is biased, the AI tool that results from it is also biased, and in some ways that bias is compounded. There is an unequal representation of voices. Google Books started by scanning books from, academic universities. Those tend to be male and white dominated. Well, those scans were then used to train the AI models. And so that bias for one group is continued there. And the harmful stereotypes that exist in the training models are carried over into the AI tool themselves. And this has a very strong impact on marginalized scholars and creators because it amplifies the loudest voices in the room. And the faults in how the model is designed to think just grow. So consider, X's Grok. It became a self-declared mecha Hitler because of the data set it was trained on. It became just spewing racist vitriol. And so these things are compounded. The bias that was there before didn't go away. AI is not neutral when it comes to what it produces. And this, gets tied up into the idea of open access versus proprietary data systems, because who gets to participate in knowledge creation? Proprietary systems are expensive and you have to pay for them. Open access may be available to more people, but there is a skill privilege to using those sort of platforms. And how does this tie into the framework on information has value? Well, we have to understand how value is unevenly distributed. A lot of these creators, again, their work was used without their permission. But some creators who have better resources have been able to fight back and claim at least some monetary value out of that. We also have to recognize systemic privilege and underrepresentation. Those groups that had privilege before continue to have that privilege, and it's just keeps going. And we also need to encourage the critical evaluation of whose voices are centered or silenced when using these tools. And so how do we navigate this information privilege? Well, just a quick definition that information privilege is access to resources and training when it comes to information. There is a saying that information wants to be free, which is true. Information wants to be freely available, but most people tend to forget the next part of the statement is, but it also wants to be expensive. Information does want to be distributed widely, access to that information tends to be paywalled. And there is privilege both on an institutional and a personal level. Who pays? Who can afford to pay? These are questions that come up every day. And so we need to help learners recognize their own access privileges, their biases, and their monetary privileges. College students have more access now than they did before when, say, they were in high school or in their personal lives. And when they leave the university, they might not have the same level of access to high quality information. And our level of information privilege changes throughout our lives because it's tied to the institutions that we have access to, either through our own personal work or who we work for on a daily basis. And so we need to encourage choice making. When is AI appropriate versus when might it mislead or deter from a process? We need to also understand the limitations. AI, often these days, yes, it is a predictive model that creates stuff. It is not a search tool, but many people are using it as a search shortcut because it seems easier to get that information. But is that the right choice in the moment? And we also need to evaluate AI generated information. But the skills needed to evaluate that also are on the information privilege spectrum. If you have been deeply trained in evaluating information, you will have an easier time accessing the output of AI than you would if you're just a casual user who does not have that background. And so we need to make ethical choices around sharing, reusing, and remixing information when it comes to AI. And this ties into the frame because it promotes self-awareness and responsibility around the use of AI. It also reinforces the idea that users are both consumers and creators when it comes to AI, and it encourages ethical participation in information ecosystems. And so here are some practical strategies that you can use if you're a faculty member in the classroom or when you're designing assignments. Consider integrating conversations about authorship and intellectual property into assignments. It's more than just avoiding plagiarism. We want people thinking about how. How did this piece of information come about and for what purpose? And that could probably lead to some spicy conversations in your classroom. You might also want to require reflection on when and how AI was used. Was it a simple search or was it a wholesale creation of something? And what does that mean when that creation was used or created out of material stolen from others? And you also need to encourage source checking beyond the AI generated answers. And this gets to the, critical skill set of lateral reading, where people begin critically thinking about the information that they see in front of them. And you can design research tasks where AI is a tool, not the entire process. So, how can you think about scaffolding AI into student projects without AI generating the entirety of the end work that you hope students to produce? We can also focus on skill building. So teaching how to evaluate AI outputs for accuracy and bias. Again, down to that lateral reading that is helpful in many areas of life. And this comes from encouraging cross-checking with authoritative and diverse sources because there's different kinds of authority, which is again, part of the information has value. And we can also discuss privacy implications before using new tools. So if you're going to have your students use an AI tool, have a discussion with them about, okay, once you start using it, what does it mean about the information you are putting into that tool? Are you signing away your rights in any way? Have them read that end user agreement. And you can also emphasize ethical reuse and citation and transparency when using AI. And the UDC library, we have an AI help guide, which talks about how to do these sorts of things, including how to be transparent with the use of AI. And finally, we can look at some practical strategies as it relates to the framework. So this frame is important because it strengthens learners' ability to participate ethically. You can use these tools, but consider the entire cost. And that goes beyond just, say, the subscription fee to using Claude or using ChatGPT. And this builds in the awareness of the overall value systems embedded in information technologies. Again, it goes far beyond money. Is it who gets to own this? Who gets to profit from this? Who gets access to it? Again, bringing everything back to that information privilege. And finally, this frame and how it ties into AI encourages responsible creation and dissemination of work. AI is a tool like anything else, but how we use it exists in this overall ecosystem of information. And so, if you have any questions about this or any of the other frames or just what it means to use AI, please don't hesitate to contact us. Our email is on the screen. We also offer online chat, and that's live UDC librarians. We are not AI bots. We also offer appointments both online or in person, or you can stop by the library at any time. And now I'd like to open it for questions, and we'll have time for unrecorded questions if you prefer. As I wait to see if anything comes in, I do want to say thank you for attending today, and the recording will be up this afternoon. All right, I'm not seeing any questions come in. So again, thank you for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you at one of our next webinars.